Well, hello everyone, and welcome back to another installment in our reviewed and ranked series. Today is the last episode of any of the free characters that are included within the game, including updates and the like. And we actually have a fair amount to talk about with today's character because I feel like they get overshadowed a little bit, but there's a lot of really good things going for this character, and that of course is the armor-clad Russian Colossus. So as we jump into today's breakdown, if you are enjoying this series, make sure that you are subscribed to the channel, as there is more installments from this series and other daily variety content coming to your subscription feed if you do so. And if you find today's video helpful, informative, and or enjoyable, make sure that you hit that like button. So Colossus is a very interesting build character because he very much fits into the heavy demographic, and that's all well and good, but he plays very distinctly from any of the heavies that we have looked at up into this point in time. And the things that make him unique will come into focus as we talk more about the character. But starting off, we have, of course, the team build synergies that he has access to. And he only has 4, but the 4 that he has are actually quite nice. He has 3 strength synergies with X-Men, heavy hitters, and all new X-Men. And then that last synergy is a defense synergy with heavy metal. So not only can you get a decent amount of extra power out of your team by having Colossus in the roster, you can also bolster the team's survivability a little bit by that defensive synergy that he has. If you can find team members that will feed into the strength modifier that Colossus has, then you're going to have a lot of fun just tearing through your opponents a lot faster than you otherwise would. Moving on to talk a little bit more about the base attacks and functions of Colossus's character, we have his standard attack sequence, which is just 3 strikes, and that's very, very common with the heavy type characters. As a matter of fact, there's only a few that really break that classification. And they are very solid strikes. They are up close and personal. They deter retaliation from the smaller grunt type characters, which is all well and good for what Colossus is built for, and that's tearing through some of your opponents. Colossus's heavy attack is deceiving because there are a couple of heavy attacks that have unique properties, and Colossus's is very much one of those. If you press the heavy attack button 3 times, one after the other, he will unleash some ground pounds with a double-fisted slam down into the ground directly in front of him, and each of those has increasing strength, with the last one being the strongest of all. And as you can see, there is a particle effect that shoots out across the ground that demonstrates the area of effect of this heavy attack, and he has quite a lot of range with that. So there's a lot to really love about Colossus because his heavy attack has such a far reach and hits multiple times with increasing power throughout. Colossus only has a jump. He does not have any mid-air maneuverability, and that's all well and good because sometimes that's just kind of what you need from the heavy characters, and there's no reason he would have any sort of additional traversal, so not really a whole lot more to talk about in this area. Colossus's falling aerial is certainly funny to look at because he just kind of slams right back down onto the ground with both feet and kind of lands in a bit of a crouched position before standing up fully. But that certainly does have its applications in terms of the area of effect that it hits. However, like we've mentioned with a majority of the cast, he unfortunately does not have any abilities that set him up into using his falling aerial naturally. So you're not going to find a lot of circumstances where this attack can be used, organically. But it's still kind of funny and unique to Colossus, to be sure. Now, the block and dodge animation for Colossus is very unique amongst the heavy class. He will brace both of his arms out in front of him, but instead of crossing them, he holds them vertically, parallel to one another, and that is a very brawler-style protective stance that he goes into, which is understandable because Colossus is very heavily melee combat oriented. And unlike his other heavy counterparts, when he dodges out of the way of an attack, he actually will roll forward. So despite the fact that he is a heavy character, he still has that essence and semblance of being a bit more nimble than other counterparts within his own class, which is always a fun thing to see, and I think that the rolling animations are a lot more believable than some of the dashes that you tend to see from other members of the roster. So let's pivot and talk a little bit about Colossus's abilities, and the first ability he has is the Chrome Charge. Now normally with other heavy characters, we've seen that these charge type attacks are the strongest attack in their arsenal, and that is where Colossus breaks some of that mold, because he does have other abilities that are, believe it or not, a lot more powerful than this, and we will talk about those in turn. That's not to downplay the Chrome Charge by any means, because it is still a very good option as it helps Colossus cover a lot of ground and deals excellent damage to opponents that have stagger gauges. And you can hold down on that button to charge up the attack while also marginally adjusting the direction in which you unleash that attack. But do keep in mind that if you use this attack in a team synergy attack type, it will just detonate at its full potency in whatever direction the character is facing at the time that the attack is requested. This attack has the melee attack type and the charge synergy trait, and possesses very nice stats with a C classification to damage and energy points consumed, but with a really good rating of stagger damage dealt in the A classification. And with all but one of Colossus's abilities, they benefit from the same rank up bonuses, and for the three that do fall into the same criteria, it involves the reduced energy point cost, the increase to the attack damage dealt, an increase to the damage done to the stagger gauge, and finally that reduced chance of the attack being interrupted. Colossus's second ability is a very heavy hitting attack, and that is the Silver Slam. This is actually reminiscent of a couple of attacks that we have seen, mainly the Gamma Slam from Hulk. But the big difference here is instead of whipping the character around, he will instead tuck them up underneath himself, fly into the air, and crush them back down onto the ground. And that deals large amounts of damage not only to the enemy that he has scooped up, which again does have to be a grunt type character when using this attack, unfortunately, but it will also deal large amounts of damage to anyone that's in that impact zone as well. So a very powerful attack to be used. Of course, it's not quite as good if he's not able to scoop up an opponent, but that shouldn't shy you away from using this ability because of the good rating that it has to the damage potential it is capable of. This attack has that melee attack type and the slam synergy trait, and has a very respectable A classification to both damage and stagger damage dealt, while maintaining a very respectable C to the energy points consumed using this ability. Colossus's third ability is not an attack, and it's very unique to him, which I certainly respect, but at the same time, I kind of wish that some other things would have been done with this ability, or a different ability to have been given in its entirety. It's a very defensive ability, and at least it has the ability to be synergized with other abilities in your squad. And it acts similar to the absolute defense that we saw from Captain America. That video is very old, but this ability works very similarly, where it will cause any projectile type abilities to be reflected, and that can be both from your own teammates as well as the opponents that you're facing on the battlefield. This renders Colossus invulnerable to attacks that are coming in from your opponents as he kind of toughens up, and he's even mobile to move around the battlefield, albeit at a very much decreased movement speed as to what you're normally able to do when moving around with this character. But at least it doesn't lock him down into position, so that's something to take into consideration. There's no attack type associated with this because the ability in and of itself doesn't have any potential for dealing damage, and that's kind of unfortunate because we did see with Bost's Fury and Black Panther an ability that works fairly similarly, that there is at least a damage rating or a way to unleash that damage back, but the characters do work differently one from another, so it still makes sense to some degree. I just think that it would have been interesting to have had some sort of thorns mechanic. If you did have somebody attack into Colossus, that they would take at least a portion of the damage they would have dealt back, as they're essentially punching a piece of sheet metal at that point, and a very thick piece of sheet metal at that. But that's not how this ability works, instead doubling into the reflection capability. There's no attack damage that can be dealt, or stagger damage that can be dealt from using this ability, and it does have a C classification to the energy points consumed, which I guess is fair, though you will notice that with this ability it only has the benefit of having a reduced energy point cost as the ability is ranked up. So in order to have that C classification to this ability in particular, you need to have it at its maximum rank in order to take full benefit of that. Colossus's fourth and final ability is the Armored Assault, and this shares very similar ratings with the Silver Slam, and in a way is a lot more true to the Gamma Slam that we see from Hulk, because he does pick up an opponent and will proceed to spin them around. However, the difference here is that Colossus again maintains some element of being mobile during the course of this attack instead of remaining stationary while he is swinging the enemy about. It allows him to move about through areas and groups of grunt-type enemies, and that greatly extends the attack damage that you can get out of using this ability, both to the opponent that you've picked up and is unfortunate enough to be slung around the battlefield, as well as the opponents that are struck as you swing around that same field of combat. This ability has the melee attack type and the area assault synergy trait, and again maintains the very excellent rating to damage and stagger damage dealt, both of those having a classification of A, while still holding a consistent C classification to the energy points consumed when using this ability. Now, Colossus's extreme attack is interesting because it's one of the few that are existing in the game that offer a buff to the character after the attack has been concluded, though it should be noted that it is a defensive buff, which isn't bad, but most of these buffs that you like to see have the effect of bolstering the offense of either the character or the team, so it at least makes him a little bit more survivable, and we can appreciate that. It looks very similar to the attack from Hulk, but instead of ripping up the ground right underneath him and in a circle around him, it involves a large slab or stone being torn up from the ground out in front of Colossus, and each of those heaves will deal a certain amount of damage to your opponents, and then finally he will dash in and bust the large boulder that he tore up from the ground in the center of that area of effect for one larger hit at the end of that attack. The attack itself takes about 5.5 seconds to conclude before Colossus becomes actionable again, and for just under 15 seconds after the attack has concluded, you have that increased defense applied to the character. So that allows you to play a little bit more aggressive with him after you've detonated an extreme attack, which again isn't my preference for what I like to see in terms of character buffs after an extreme attack, but it is better than nothing and still faithful to the character. The one caution that I will give with Colossus's extreme attack is, like most extreme attacks we've looked at, you don't have the option of course correcting with it. You're just kind of stuck with Colossus carrying out that attack in whichever direction he is facing, though he will move forward slightly as he uses the attack towards the end, but it doesn't affect the outward reach of the attack in terms of incorporating more opponents that were just outside the range into actually receiving damage. So just be mindful that you have him facing the direction you want and need him to be whenever you do detonate his extreme attack. So now that we have talked about Colossus and the benefits that he has as a character, it's time for us to determine where he belongs within the tier list ranking. And it's very clear just with the way that his abilities function that he falls very high on this tier list, and there's no need to discuss where he would belong in any of these lower tiers, as he clearly outclasses the characters that we've ranked in B tier and lower in this series. So where does that actually leave him? Now, I know I compared a couple of things from Colossus's kit to Hulk and the way that Hulk works. However, Hulk still holds the edge when it comes to how powerful you can hit and how consistently you can get that power, because there's a lot of attacks that Hulk is capable of, and not all of them are holistically reliant on grappling one of your opponents, and that is more of the style that we see out of Colossus. The other really big drawback for me is the cold hard steel ability, because it just doesn't quite function the way that I personally would like it to, or at least in a way that would make him more viable in terms of damage output and that sort of capacity. It sure has its options, and I am appreciative of the fact that it can still synergize with other members of your team, but for me it just doesn't quite do it. And that's one of the biggest things that keeps him just out of S tier for me, is the fact that he has one ability among the many that he does have that just doesn't really do him the justice that he really is capable of putting out. So that just leaves us A tier, and where within A tier does Colossus really belong? And I've sat here and I've stewed about it and thought through the different characters that we have ranked and the placement we have them in, and what it really comes down to for me is the fact that Colossus just doesn't quite work well enough on his own. And one other issue that I didn't really mention is he has terrible energy point management on his own, and consistently finds himself burning through the available energy points as a computer on your team. So if you are looking to use an ability from him, you may not have the energy points on hand to fully get the benefit that you were hoping for out of Colossus when you do switch over to him for whatever purpose you were hoping to utilize him. So all those little things, and they're not big problems, but they are worth mentioning and recognizing. All of those little inconsistencies with this character, I feel, place him just behind Miles Morales. And that at least puts him ahead of the other heavies in this category, except for Thor, because Thor is very much in a league of his own with the elemental damage that he's capable of dealing. So we're going to go ahead and move Wasp, Thanos, and Luke Cage over to one side to make room for Colossus right here. And I am definitely going to straighten up the placement of those characters so they're not haphazardly layered on top of each other, and we retain some semblance of organization within this tier list before needing to expand the A tier down an extra row, similar to what we've done with the B tier, just adjacent to it. But what do you think? Do you think that there are things that I've missed with Colossus's character? Do you think that I'm overrating anything? Be sure to let me know what your thoughts are in the comments down below. And once again, if you've made it this far into the video, make sure you subscribe for that daily variety content, as there's a lot of really fun projects I'm working on that I'm sure that you'll be interested in seeing in the coming weeks. But thanks again for your time, and I hope that you have an absolutely fantastic rest of your day.